But I don't know, man. Bad advice, dude. This might be fire.
Because that just makes you a bad mixing engineer. That's not how mixes are created.
That's not the tip though. That's not the tip. How much compression are you doing to over compress? Because vocals are one of the most compressed things ever. Look at that. The phase just changed there. Can't do it. Can't use high passes. That's something that somebody said in like 1980 or 1990. All right, let's see this right here. The worst mixing advice I've ever seen. Are you gonna spit? Are you gonna say who it is?
G'day legends. Have you ever been watching YouTube, scrolling through Instagram, TikTok, Facebook? In this video, I'm going to talk about a couple of bad mixing advice tips that I just keep seeing coming around. Things that people keep dropping in the comments, keep emailing me about. Just stuff that I'm sick of the
Wait, is this guy blind?
fact that it's still a thing that people are asking about. And the problem is that social media
I feel like a dick, dude.
it's a bit of an echo chamber. So one person might put out this piece of advice, someone else grabs a hold of it and repeats it, and so on and so forth. And it just keeps coming around until it becomes almost fact, even without any real basis. And the problem with some of these tips is there's a little bit of truth to them. There's a little bit of, yes, that's right, but also, no, that's kind of out of context. And we need to look at these pieces of advice objectively and decide, are these blanket rules that you should stick to? Now, it's always important to remember when it comes to mixing, it's so subjective. So even though I disagree with a lot of this stuff, and I'm going to give you my spin on these bits of advice, obviously you don't have to agree with me either. But the thing is, you learn from experience. So if you just take someone's word for something and you never try it for yourself, you'll never know. Okay, the first tip that I want to talk about is one that just goes around all the time. Don't mix in solo. Now, I have to say,
Okay, wait, hold on. He's saying don't mix in solo?
Totally disagree with this because I feel like it gets blown way out of proportion, and the context of this simple little tip is lost. People get scared of the solo button. They think,
yeah, we're not going to do the whole thing, but I don't know, man. Bad advice, dude. This might be fire.
They can't solo a sound and EQ it and adjust it and compress it in solo because that just makes you a bad mixing engineer. That's not how mixes are created.
That's not the tip though. That's not the tip.
And you know what? There is some truth to the fact that you can't mix in solo. Yes, you can't mix every individual sound and then hope that it all comes together harmoniously. That is not how mixing works. But you can.
I mean, there are instances where you would do it. Like for instance, like if there's like a resonance in the sound, you need to like focus on it. You need to focus on it and like get the resonance out of it. Yeah, sure.
Solo sounds, you can EQ them, you can compress them, you can shape.
I mean, you just got to use your best judgment.
Them in solo, but the amount of time you spend in solo, you should equally spend out of solo listening to your sounds in the context of the full mix, or at least in the context of a couple of sounds. For instance, you might be mixing your drums, adding in some bass to it, adding in some guitars, and seeing how they blend together. And then once you're kind of happy with that, add in a few more sounds. And again, rinse and repeat the process until you have everything there, and then continue making choices in the full context of the mix. But you should master your songs to -40, and I can't believe that we're still talking about this in 2025 when people say master your songs to -14 LUFS. This was one of the first videos I made when I went into making audio production videos, was don't master your songs to -14 LUFS. And I'm still here repeating this to you guys a couple of years later. This is not a target for mastering. -14 LUFS is Spotify's playback volume. They just take everything and they either turn it down or...
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, the reason why people say that is... basically, if you make it louder, you may be over-compressing it if it's going to get turned down anyways.
I don't even know if they turn up, but they bring everything down to -14 LUFS to level out everyone's tracks to make the listener's experience better so that they don't have tracks jumping up and down in volume. And I seriously hate the loudness penalty website when people upload a master to it and go, well, Spotify's going to turn my track down 8 dBs. Who cares? Like, it really doesn't matter. All they're doing is adjusting levels for the user to have a good listening experience. That's all there is to it. Let's say you master your track to -14 LUFS. What's going to happen when that track gets sent to Apple Music, which has a different playback volume? How are you going to account for that? How are you going to account?
They're going to turn it up. What do you mean?
For all the different playback volumes across all the different streaming services, because they're all different. -14 LUFS is not a target to aim for. Go and download any popular song, any song that you like off of the iTunes store, Google Play Store, wherever it is, and put it into your DAW and check out how loud it is. I guarantee you it's going to be over -10 LUFS. Most stuff lands around -8 to -6, and then it goes even further when you get the really hard slamming dance tracks. Metal, hardcore tracks, they're still super loud. Don't be deceived by these people kind of repeating this stuff to you online that you should master your tracks to -14 LUFS. If you do that, your track is going to be one of the quietest songs on the Apple Store, on the Google Play Store, next to all these other tracks that are still slammingly loud. Now, I'm not advocating for loud masters. I'm not saying you got to go slam your masters, but you should be making them
too late. I'm doing it
as loud as you can and keeping them sounding good. So push it as far as you can without feeling like you've compromised the dynamics and the sound that you want to hear from your track. That is what mastering a track is about.
Okay, I'm really curious where he's going to go next.
It doesn't have to be any set volume or any kind of playback level. Just keep that in mind. This next one is an interesting one, and it doesn't apply to everyone. It only applies to people who own hardware, I guess, or people who are interested in owning hardware. And they say, don't track with hardware. There's people out there who just say never track with hardware.
Who
Just
fucking
get
says
a
that?
clean signal in, microphone preamp into your DAW, and then you can do your processing later. Now that's fine.
No, that's not common. I've like never fucking heard that.
That is totally cool to do that. And if you only have an interface, that's technically what you're doing anyway. You're tracking in a clean signal and doing all of your processing in the box. Or
this one I feel like is a straw man. I've never heard anybody say that before. Yeah, I've never heard, like, I always hear people talk about like, oh, I have like this on it while I'm like tracking and shit like that.
you can send it out to hardware and process it again and print it back in if you want. But to say never use hardware while tracking, that's crazy. I always track with compression on vocal.
There's got to be like one person that said this to him ever, and then that's like, he probably seen this once, just one time.
It's amazing. I would never go back to tracking vocals without it. I love the way that vocals come in sounding, 80-90% of the way there, because they're already dynamically controlled.
Yeah, you missed
and they sound great. The color and the vibe that the compressor can add to a vocal and to the performance, and the way that the artist can react to singing into compression, it's amazing. It makes performing so much better because you can hear yourself really well. You can vibe off of having that compression on your vocal. There's absolutely nothing wrong with tracking with a bit of compression on your voice. Even if you want to do a tiny bit of EQ to add a bit of color and shape to your vocals, to a snare drum.
I don't know. I feel like doing EQ is a little more crazy, but I mean, compression, yeah, sure. Because like, you're not gonna be able to change that EQ. I mean, you can EQ afterwards, but if you pick the wrong fucking frequency, like if you're a dumbass and you pick the wrong frequency, you're stuck with that frequency.
To a bass guitar, a guitar, it's totally cool. It can save you a bunch of time post because you already have these sounds dialed in to an extent. Of course, you're probably going to still want to do a little bit more in the box, but you're going to be so much closer to a finished sound and need to do so much less post. Now, of course, there is a disclaimer that you can ruin stuff if you don't know what you're doing. If you over compress vocals while you're tracking, you're stuck with that.
Dude, over compressing vocals while you're tracking, how much fucking compression are you doing to over compress? Because vocals are one of the most compressed things ever.
If you over EQ something, you're kind of stuck with that. You can kind of try and fix it later, but if you totally butcher it, yeah, it's not going to be great. So it does come with practice. If you want to use hardware while you're tracking, you need to learn how to do it. You need to know how to do it tastefully and when enough is enough. You really don't want to overdo it.
Okay, let's move on to the next one.
Right, this next one is an interesting one that's kind of popped up in the last couple of years, and it's about high-pass filters,
apparently.
low-pass filters. Like people saying don't use high-pass filters on anything because it ruins the phase of the sound. This is...
Oh, yeah, that's funny because it's like, bro, you think anybody can fucking tell? You think anybody can fucking tell?
Super weird to me because I think there's this real mathematical, sciencey kind of idea around it. Like you look into it, you look at what it's done to the waveform, and you could say, wow, it's kind of...
It's like, oh, you shouldn't high pass your song. Look at that. The phase just changed there. Can't do it. Can't use high passes. Look at that. It changes the phase. So it's like, well, yeah, all EQ changes the phase, brother.
Doing stuff to it.
Don't matter.
Right. But ultimately, when it comes to high passing and low passing, it's about how it sounds. Let's take mastering, for example. The classic 30 hertz high pass filter. People think that absolutely ruins a master. It most likely depends on the content that you're
mastering. What? High passing at 30 at mastering? That seems crazy.
Mastering, if you've got like super sub heavy 808 bass material that's getting right down in there, maybe
Oh, my cam did it again? God damn it, dude. I'm like having like a power issue with like my fucking computer. Alright, there we go. Because like randomly it'll just like disconnect. That freeze frame. Yeah, maybe I should leave it.
High pass filter at 30 hertz is going to hurt the bass because that's where it's occupying. It's right down in the subby stuff. But if you're working on a rock mix that doesn't have much going on at 30 hertz, a 30 hertz high pass filter,
I shouldn't have high passed my camera.
Probably not going to hurt your master. And same for like high passing tracks. They say use a low shelf, don't use a high pass filter. I think there's a lot of overthinking going on when it comes to this stuff. High pass filters are there to help shape a sound, and they're amazing. If you have a guitar track and it's got some rumbly low stuff going on that's just unnecessary, a high pass filter quickly cleans that up. It does not ruin the way the guitar signal sounds. Vocal recordings, high pass filters are absolutely essential because if you get a vocalist who's getting some plosive coming through, and sometimes even with pop filters and a great mic and distance, it still happens. Some people are just airy. They just get those plosives going. High pass filters fix that 99% of the time. Getting that high pass in there cleans it up and gets rid of that puffy air that's getting down into those low frequencies. And I mean, you could probably get a similar result with a low shelf, but you're not going to hear a difference. The point is, there's this weird thing going around about high pass.
Wait, hold on. Airy? Huh?
Airy. They just get come. Does not ruin the way the guitar signal sounds.
Wait, hold on a second. Does he mean low pass?
I think there's a lot of overthinking going on when it
high pass shouldn't fix airiness. Are you thinking a high shelf?
Comes to this stuff. High pass filters are there to help shape a sound, and they're amazing. If you have a guitar track and it's got some rumbly low stuff going on that's just unnecessary, a high pass filter quickly cleans that up. It does not ruin the way the guitar signal sounds. Vocal recordings, high pass filters are absolutely essential because if you get a vocalist who's getting some plosive coming through, and sometimes even with pop filters and a great mic and distance, it still happens. Some people are just airy. They just get those plosives going. High pass filters fix that 99.
Dude, what? No, it does not. A high-pass filter does not fix explosives. What?
Percent of the time. Getting that high pass in there cleans it up and gets rid of that puffy air that's getting down into those low frequencies. And I mean, you could probably get a similar result with a low shelf, but you're not going to hear a difference. The point is, there's this weird thing going around about high
Dude, just use a deep plosive plugin.
pass filters and scaring people into not using them. All I have to say is, if you put a high pass or a low pass on a sound and you feel like it's ruining it, then maybe you don't need a high pass filter. Maybe you don't need a low pass filter on that particular sound. But do not be scared of using high pass filters. They are an amazing tool for cleaning up your sound, for even shaping it. If you're trying to create a filtered sound, you can get that radio effect using high pass filters. There's a lot of cool things you can do with them. One thing I would say is to be aware of is when you're working with multi-mic setups and you add high pass filters. For example, let's say you've got a kick in mic and a kick out microphone.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with EQing. That's one time when you want to use linear phase.
You high pass the kick in, it will probably create a phase issue with the kick out mic. If they were already perfectly in phase and you add a high pass filter to one of them, this is something I've noticed, is they can sometimes end up out of phase with each other. And that's where sometimes using a linear phase EQ for just a high pass filter actually works at keeping things in phase. When you're doing a multi-mic setup and where phase relationship is really important. But guys, don't be scared of using high pass filters. Use them creatively, use them with your ears. Don't overthink it too much. There's some people out here who are overthinking things way too much. All right, so this is a funny one. It's when you get purists out there and they say, don't use drum samples. Like, drum samples are bad. They're ruining music. They make it sound terrible.
This has got to be a rock music take.
Now, the problem here is it's 2025 and a lot of genres are heavily layered with drum samples, and it's almost part of the sound of some genres. Like, you cannot achieve that particular sound unless you are layering samples in with your drums. Now, I personally have no issue with drum samples. I love using them in my mixes because a lot of stuff I'm going for is that kind of big modern drum sound. Now, I love mixing drums without samples as well, but when I'm going for a specific sound, that doesn't have to have this stupidly larger-than-life production about it, because raw drums just don't sound like that. You can't process a snare drum the way that you can process a snare sample because it's isolated. It doesn't have all of the issues that come with a live kit. You have all of the cymbal bleed. You can use things like silencer, you can do the Pro MB bleed, cymbal remove trick, but you still cannot really process that drum to sound the way that samples sound.
I don't care about this one. Next.
Who cares? I'm sure you've heard this one before. You can't master your own tracks. Now, this is absolute load of crap because I've been doing audio production forever now. It feels like forever, maybe like 50.
Well, the whole thing with like not mastering your own tracks is like, it's just like advice. It's like advice to not master your own tracks, especially starting out, because like usually you lose objectiveness on it, especially if you're the person who mixed it.
15 years I've been running a studio, and I'd say 98% of the stuff that I work on, I do the mixing and the mastering. I always leave it open to my clients. If you want to take it somewhere else for mastering, you are more than welcome to. I'll give you the mix and you can use your own mastering engineer. I have no problems with that. But most of the times, no one says, hey, I want to get this mastered somewhere else, so I mustn't be doing anything too wrong by mastering my tracks that I'm working on. Now, the little bit of truth that's in there about not mastering your own tracks, like, it's not really that you shouldn't do it, but having an external set of ears come in and working your track can actually really be a great thing, because sometimes when you work on a track for a really long amount of time, you stop hearing things.
Okay, we get the idea.
Skills. Staying in the land of mastering advice here, you've probably heard someone say, never use more than 3 dBs of limiting on your mix. Now, if you've done this long enough, you'll know that that's absolutely bogus, because 3 dBs of limiting is not going to make your mix very loud at all. Now,
I would say 6. I think 6 is more of a limit.
If you don't care about loudness, maybe 3 dB.
I don't know. I mean, I would go just based off, like, I mean, 6 is like a rough limit. You know, obviously go with like your own hearing. You know, if it sounds fine with more than that. If 6 sounds like too much, then don't do that.
dBs is all you need. It's going to give you that little bit of extra volume. It's going to pull the dynamics in a little bit. But if you're not kind of building dynamics into your mixing, and then you're only applying 3 dBs of limiting on your mix bus, that might just be the snare. You might have your snare like kind of like way too loud and dynamic in the mix, and it's just cutting through, and you just cut 3 dBs off the snare, and your mix is still going to be incredibly quiet when you compare it to more commercial, professional stuff. Now, that's a whole thing in itself, like learning to mix and get your dynamics reined in, but still have dynamics and then be able to master your track loud. That's a thing in itself. But saying you should only ever use 3 dBs of limiting on a mix, I think that is something that someone said once, and it's just kind of like taken off around the internet.
Something that somebody said in fucking like 1980 or 1990.
And it tricks people because they're like, I can't get my mix loud enough. Well, try limiting a bit harder and see how it sounds. Sometimes, you know, you can limit your track like 8 dBs. That sounds like a lot.
Worst mixing advice. Put ODT and soothe on every channel of every track.
Have you ever heard that? Is that something you've heard? OTT and soothe? I feel like you're fucking with me. You gotta be fucking with me.
And it can still sound good. Some people might watch this and be like, what is this guy talking about? You can't limit a track 8 dBs. Look, I've done it. I do it on some tracks and it sounds great. And I've done the stacking limiters together. And sometimes just one limiter slamming it sounds better than 3 limiters stacked on top of each other. Sometimes stacking limiters sounds better, but each limiter imparts a coloration into your track. So that's just something to think about. And
what about clipping, man? Clipping.
A little off tangent here anyway. But the thing is, like, I've seen great mixes like Nolly Get Good. 10 dBs of limiting on a track on a mixing course he was showing off, and he's just slamming it. It sounds awesome because the mix is great and it comes into the limiter, and that doesn't affect it. If you have a poorly balanced mix, the limiter sometimes can eat it up and distort and get really ugly very quickly. So there's a lot of factors to it, right? But sometimes you watch those videos where someone's mastering a song and they're like, oh, I only needed to add like 1 to 2.
Put OTT on the bass reverb send. The problem with, so you're gonna want it to be a linear phase on the OTT if you're gonna do that, because OTT like usually like fucks up the phase like horribly. No joke, I've seen a tutorial for color bass, dude hyped it with OTT, then you soothe the cut back the resonances that you created.
No, actually do put OTT and soothe on every channel of every track.
Okay. So they're saying do it. Okay. Well, I mean, he paid more money, so I think he's got to be correct.
dBs of limiting, and I'm at -6 LUFS.
I mean, people just be like saying anything. Like there's no like gatekeeping as far as like tutorials on the internet.
It's a load of crap because they probably already received the mix limited or with a heavy amount of clipping done to it to get it loud enough that the fact they only need to apply a small amount of limiting to get that loudness, that's the only way that's achievable. And I will tell you that there will be people giving out advice who will lead you astray because they want to seem like they know what they're talking about and they want to fit in with these bits of advice that have been floating around for so long. But to say you should only limit a track at 3 dBs max,
that's crazy, dude. Like I feel like some of this advice is like stuff I've never heard. Like I've heard one person say in my entire lifetime.
Each mix. Okay, next one is just a funny one around EQ when people are like, you should never cut or boost more than 3 dBs. Like they're like, that's, you know, if you go further than that, like it's just bad. But if you only do that, you'll end up,
I've never heard this,
with pretty raw sounding mixes still. There's plenty of times when you need,
I think I've heard that for like mastering, like you shouldn't be like boosting or minusing more than like 3 dB or like 6 dB or something like that. But like, I just use your fucking ears, dude, you know?
To crank the EQ to get the sound you're chasing. And I really think some people get scared of EQ and they think, oh yeah, I'm not going to go further than 3 dB boost because that might be unnatural. But truth is, sometimes you track something and it's just like mega dull and it just needs to be brightened up a lot, or maybe it's been tracked and it's incredibly harsh and it needs a really deep cut to make it sound great again. Like when it comes to EQ, you just got to do what you got to do to make it sound good. There's no limitations here. There's even people out there who are like only cut on digital EQ.
This guy's actually an engineer. I'm not 100% certain though. I'd never seen him before this.
But like never boost because it sounds harsh, and like that's just crazy, man. They overthink this stuff a little too much. There are situations when you shouldn't do a lot. If something sounds great, you're not going to need much EQ, right? When you're mastering it.
Okay. Next.
I'm totally sure there's more and more bad mix advice out there, and maybe some of it you heard on this channel. Look, I'm human. I've probably said something and at some point it becomes redundant, or maybe it's just been a bit of bad advice. Just come into these things with the idea of testing this stuff for yourself. If someone says don't do this, then you ask why. And you know, maybe they think don't do this because they've learned from an experience, but you haven't had that experience. Maybe you need to go and test this for yourself and understand why you shouldn't do that, or maybe why they're wrong, why that's a bad piece of advice. So anytime someone says, never do this, don't do this, this is the only way to do something, when it comes to mixing, you just can't take blanket statements like that because...
Dude, I mean, I guess, would you say he's giving blanket statements too? I don't know.
Stuff is super subjective. Sometimes breaking the rules sounds absolutely amazing, and sometimes sticking to the rules sounds absolutely boring. And so you need to like just experiment and try things for yourself and just see what sounds good. So if you've made it this far, congratulations on making it to the end of this rant. Probably was a little bit long-winded, but these are just things that keep coming up, comments I keep seeing, things that people keep asking me about, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on them. And I really just want to encourage you guys to not just take everything that you see online and hear from producers as a blanket rule, as things that you just need to stick.
Okay.